It may be romanticism, but I still think that educated people are going to want to pick up a newspaper, hold it in their hands, and peruse its contents at their leisure without being glued to a glowing cathode ray tube. So what has all this got to do with you? And specifically, what has it got to do with journalism education? I bet you thought I'd never ask. Obviously, there are many implications. One is this: don't expect the journalism profession of 10 years from now to look like the one we have today. Profound changes may be coming, and coming fast. This means that today's colleges must turn out versatile and flexible graduates, not ones trained to the particular technology of the moment, nor the jobs that are available right now. These jobs may not be there in 5 years, and almost certainly the tools used in those jobs will change from the ones you may be using in your journalism school laboratories. This means that journalism schools, now more than ever, have an obligation to give their students a broad, liberal education that will give them a foundation for the changing times ahead. As I learned after I got out of journalism school, it is more important to be able to write a clear, readable sentence than to know how to operate a VDT terminal. It is more important to have studied history and economics and sociology and political science and maybe even accounting than to have practiced laying out pages or writing headlines. The message is this: don't train for today's jobs. Train for tomorrow's challenges. Learn how to write well and how to think clearly, and try to understand the past so that you can cope with the future. If you give me people with brains and character, I can train them in whatever technology comes along. The business of journalism is undergoing a profound change in America today, and nobody knows exactly where that's going to lead us. But we do know that this society, this democracy, cannot work and cannot last unless free journalists can continue doing their jobs, and unless a public will support and encourage that work. I have to believe that this will be true in the next 75 years, as it has been in the past 75. Because if you do not believe that, you do not believe in the future of America. And I know, as we are all here celebrating this proud anniversary, that we are all believers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. We'll open the floor now for questions, taking about 15 minutes or so of those. So if you'll just raise your hand, Mr. Gannon will recognize you. Jim?
Yes.
On an average nightly network, about 60 million people listen to the three major networks. Yet on a daily basis on a newspaper, Wall Street Journal has, say, 1.8 million subscribers. How would you explain the thing that I read is that the influence of newspapers in shaping people's opinions is still greater than that of a network, which reaches a lot more people in general than an individual city newspaper?
One part of the answer is that the television product is shaped by the newspaper. The television news directors at the network stations, and I might say the television news directors in Des Moines, read their newspaper in the morning to find out what's going on in the world and to find out what's important. If it's on the front page of the New York Times and it's a big story, you can expect to see it on CBS that night. The fact is, they don't do all that much independent thinking about what news is. Now, that's a biased answer, obviously, from a newspaper man. But I heard the same thing said just the other night on another program by a distinguished television personality. So I think it's indisputable that newspapers, the key leading newspapers, do help shape in a very significant way what you see on television. It is undoubtedly true that a great many more people are exposed to any one of the television network programs than are exposed to the New York Times. But don't forget that the Times or the Post or some of the others I mentioned are also influencing the decisions on news on a great many newspapers across the country. Every newspaper at night gets a report from the New York Times saying, these are the stories that we're playing on page 1. We look at that at the Des Moines Register. We don't necessarily follow it, but it's an interesting to know what is going to be on the front page of the Times tomorrow morning. And if we see a story on there that we haven't gotten from anywhere yet, we begin to wonder, well, what is that story about? Let's watch the wires closely and see what it is. So that those papers are shaping the television network news play, and they're also shaping in a very significant way the news play of papers all across the country. And I think there's no way to overestimate the influence that the Times, the Post, and a few other institutions have.
Just a quick follow-up. You also say that it's got anything to do with the fact that the newspaper can come down in such a hard-edged point of view one way or the other, and the networks are a lot more objective, or try to be seemingly more objective than
Well, no, I don't buy that idea at all, that the networks are necessarily more objective. I think, in fact, that the networks have gone a great distance in, I won't say editorializing, but in doing analysis that interprets the news and casts and puts a certain cast on it. So that I don't think there's any great claim to objectivity in television news as opposed to newspapers. Yes, sir.
If I come to you as a graduate of journalism looking for a job, what are the things you're looking for me before giving a job?
Okay. I want to see where you went to school, what you studied, what kind of grades you got. I want to see what courses you took. I want to see if you show any evidence of being able to write, which is critical, whether you can communicate, what kind of a person you come across as in an interview, whether you have ideas, ambition, personality, all of those things. It's a very complex process. I think hiring is the toughest job I have. It's the hardest thing to do. It's the thing that you are less certain of whenever you make a decision, is this the right person? I think it's extraordinarily difficult to evaluate a person despite all you know about him on paper and all you may get in an extensive interview. It's extraordinarily difficult to really know whether this person has the makings of a good journalist. And you do the best you can, and you take a flyer on somebody that looks good to you, and you find out in 6 months or a year whether you were right or wrong. You hope to be right more often than you're wrong, but sometimes you're wrong. But I think that you have to come with some basic qualities of being able to write, if you're going to a newspaper, being able to write, being able to think clearly, having some evidence of basic intelligence and character, and a desire to be in this business and understanding of it, that you have some commitment to it, that you're not passing through journalism on the way to public relations or somewhere else. I think that's an important factor, too, that you sort of believe that this is an important thing and that you have some sort of a commitment to the idea of a journalistic profession. All of those things are important. It's hard to weigh one against the other, but I think we look for all of them. Yes?
Yeah, you were involved as a chancellor trying to organize a presidential candidate debate.
Right.
You were successful with one party. I'd like to have you answer two questions. Number one, what do you think of the state of presidential debates today? Do you foresee any more? And number two, CBS reported tonight that the president feels as though maybe his views haven't been accurately or fairly reported at this point in the campaign. Has the media been fair in the campaign?
On the first point, as to debates, we were disappointed, of course, that we were not able to bring off the Democratic debate before the caucuses. And I've been disappointed as an observer that the debate process has basically collapsed this year. I do not expect to see any more presidential debates unless there's a last-minute change of heart. I think the debates perform a very useful function, and I think voters have come to look forward to them as particularly in an election where it's hard, so many voters are having a difficult time coming up with an answer on what they want, who they want to vote for, that they look forward to debates of that kind as a way to guide them. So it's unfortunate it's collapsed. It's clear why it's collapsed, is that at the given moments when debates were going to be held, it was not in the political interest of one candidate or another to be there. It was not in the interest, Ronald Reagan thought, to be in Iowa in January. He made a mistake. He admitted he made a mistake. He should have come, and it cost him. He lost in Iowa. President Carter decided after accepting the invitation that it was not in his interest to be here, notwithstanding his other reasons. It was clearly a political decision. As to the fairness or unfairness of the coverage of this campaign, it's a dismal campaign. It's a dreadful campaign. As a journalist, I'm almost tempted to say it doesn't deserve fair coverage. It's so bad. That if I were out covering the campaign trail, I'd be beside myself, I think, trying to make sense of this and to make it have some meaning to people, because it's a dreadful sort of exercise in gutter politics, is the best I can characterize it. Now, I don't think any of the presidential candidates has any particular complaint coming to them about how the campaign has been covered. They have shaped it, and they have shaped it in a dismal direction. And if the coverage has indicated that it's a lousy campaign, that's because that's the way they've designed it. So perhaps it'll change from here on. We can all hope so. It's been very disappointing so far. Yes, ma'am.
Considering it is such a dismal campaign, what do you feel is the responsibility of the media to get people to vote?
Well, frankly, my own view is that it's not the responsibility of the media to get people to vote. I think whether you vote or not is a very personal decision. And I think, in fact, despite all the hand-wringing about apathy, that non-voting also is a statement, and it may be a very rational decision. And so I don't get too terribly upset, as many other commentators do, that only 50% of the people turn out, or 40%, or whatever. I suspect that reflects disillusionment with the candidates and the campaign and so on. It would ideally be better for democracy if everyone voted, but if this is the choice presented to them and they decide that that's no choice at all and they'd rather stay home, I can't really quarrel with that. That's a rational decision, too. Furthermore, this is not at all democratic to say it, but I think there are a lot of people who shouldn't vote because they don't know what they're voting about. So if they stay home after not having paid the least bit of attention to what's gone on in politics in the last 6 months, that's fine with me. I'd just as soon leave it with people who are informed. Not a democratic thought at all. It's rather royalist, but yes, ma'am.
I'd like to get back to one of the comments you made in your talk about the court threatening the newspapers. And from some of the things you said about the First Amendment freedom being taken away and the privacy laws getting wider and wider, I'm wondering if you were advocating a commonly held view by many journalists that the First Amendment is absolute and Congress shall make absolutely no law and neither shall the state, and that journalists can say or print whatever they choose and private citizens have no right to object to this.
The latter part does not flow from the former part, which I embrace. The former part being that the First Amendment is indeed absolute. It is not qualified whatsoever. It says the Congress shall make no law regarding the press. And it doesn't say no unreasonable law or any qualification whatsoever. It just says no law. There shall be no law on this subject. Rather clear-cut, I believe. I don't think it flows from that the press can get away with anything it pleases and that there's no recourse whatsoever. I think common law has established a doctrine of libel that clearly we are bound by. I also will admit there is a right to privacy and that there are circumstances under which a newspaper should not print everything it knows about a private individual. But those are decisions that I think ought to be in the hands of editors and journalists to make responsibly. And if they do not make them responsibly, there should be recourse to the courts. But some bunch of politicians in a state legislature or a Congress should not decide what the bounds are on that freedom. That freedom is absolute, and if it's abused, then let the courts deal with the abuses. But I just think it's clear-cut that the First Amendment is absolute, and Congress has no no business legislating, nor does any state legislature about what a newspaper should print or what a broadcaster should broadcast. Yes, sir.
It's been the policy of the Register to come out for one or the other of the major candidates just before the election. I have no quarrel with your policy, but I'd be interested in the background. For example, are you going to come out for Culver or Grassley the week before the election?
Well, yes. We are going to come out for Culver or Grassley the week before the election, probably. Which of those we will come out for, I'm not prepared to say tonight, because I, in fact, don't know, and I should explain my position. I do not set the editorial policy on the editorial page of the paper. I'm in charge of the news operations of the paper. Anything you see in the paper that's not on the editorial page ultimately can be blamed on me or credited to me. But the editorial page is under Michael Gartner, the editor, and Gil Cranberg, the editorial page editor, and so I don't have any ultimate control on that. I have some input into it and give some ideas and occasionally write pieces that appear on the editorial page, but those reflect my views, not the newspapers. So I'm not ultimately in charge of that, but it's been the history and tradition of the paper to endorse candidates. I suspect we will again. I'm not sure which candidates we're going to endorse because we haven't really sat down to decide that yet. It's not as easy in some cases this year as it might be in other years.
Any more questions? Back there.
How do you allot your newspaper coverage to the indirect endorsement of candidates through exposure, as opposed to the major candidates for the presidency this year, Anderson, Carter, and Reagan, and in those three, as well as the minor candidates, the Socialist, Citizens Party, and Libertarian candidates?
Well, in terms of allotting news space, I don't think there's any formal process. Certainly, we do not make any attempt to measure how many column inches we have given to Reagan and make sure that we have given equal number of column inches to Carter and Anderson. There's no equal space doctrine in newspapers as there is an equal time doctrine in broadcasting, nor should there be. Those are editorial judgments, and we try, in a general sense, to be fair, to balance our coverage, to make sure that we don't have a Reagan story on the front page every day and have Carter on the inside backed by the want ads every day. There's a conscious effort to try to balance the way we play the stories, but not in any kind of formal sense of measuring how many inches we give to each candidate. As for the minor party candidates, it's a hard fact of life that a minor party candidate doesn't get a whole lot of coverage because in the real world they are not major factors in the election. And particularly in an era such as right now where space is at a very much of it a premium. And we would ideally like to run much more on politics than we are. We're not going to use a lot of space on very minor party candidates. And I know that bothers a lot of people, but that's just the way it is. Yes?
You said that Congress should have no business sticking their nose in the newspaper business nor broadcast. How much freedom do you think the broadcast people should have? Should they have the same freedom as the newspaper?
No. The broadcasting business is quite a bit different than the newspaper business, and I don't claim to be any expert on the broadcasting business, but it's a licensed industry. It's regulated by the federal government. There's a government agency set up to regulate and control it. That's not true of newspapers, never has been, and I hope never will be. The broadcast business is substantially different. I ought to defer and let Jack answer your question, really. But my view is that they're not entirely parallel. I would hope to see an equal amount of freedom in the journalistic functions, in news gathering and news reporting and editorializing and everything else. I think broadcast journalists should be just as free as print journalists to perform that vital news function. The industry is regulated. It doesn't particularly bother me. Maybe that's because I'm not in that industry. But I think it's substantially different and probably will remain so. Yes, sir.
What are your reactions to the statement that the Anderson candidacy has been made by the media and
I loved that. I loved that statement. That came from a fellow who in 1975 had never been heard of, and in 1976 was created almost instantly by the media right here in Iowa. And that fellow now has the chutzpah, if that's the right word, to complain that another fellow did what he did. Jimmy Carter, if there ever was a candidate invented by the media, he can claim the fame. In fact, he planned, you know, if you look back at Jimmy Carter's campaign documents and plans, which date from 1972, the famous blueprint written by Hamilton Jordan. It was a blueprint on how to get elected president, and it was a genius document. And it set out very specifically, here's how we get elected president. In 1972, what we do, first of all, is we invite all the national news columnists down to Atlanta so that they'll get to know who you are. And they did that, and they very, very cleverly and very calculatedly laid out a program to have Jimmy Carter discovered by the media, and it worked. And now he's complaining that maybe it works almost as well for someone else. So I don't take it too seriously.
Do you think the media normally plays a part, you know, you say it now and that time, do you think it normally plays a part in that role, or does it play that role?
It plays a very important part in deciding who will be taken seriously and who won't. There's no denying this, that if you convince the David Broders and the Jack Germans and the other key writers of politics that you are a serious candidate and that you have a good chance, that's half the battle. The press is though very few people, very, very important in determining who gets the coverage and who gets taken seriously. That's a problem we have today. I don't know what the answer to that is. It partly flows from the fact that the parties don't serve much of a useful function that way anymore. And I think it's a burdensome responsibility, and all of these guys worry about the responsibility that they have, but that's where we've come, and particularly television has created the environment where that's possible for a virtual unknown like Jimmy Carter or John Anderson to become in a very short period of time a national figure. That was never true in our history before. It's true now, and I guess we're stuck with it unless someone comes up with a new system for nominating presidents.
One final question.
Yes.
Yeah, the Register seems to have taken seriously the phenomenon called the New Far Right. You yourself have written about Jerry Falwell and Christian Boyce and whatnot. At this point, do you see that as a serious threat, as a serious political force, or just having fun with it?
Not having too much fun, but it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell whether that is a serious political force. It obviously is the intention of a great many people to make it a serious force. And they're working at it very hard, and they're showing some signs of success. What I'm uncertain of in my own mind is whether they are much better at generating news attention, publicity, or whatever you want to call it, than they will be in generating votes. I think it remains to be proven whether they really are going to be able to deliver on what they say they want to do. But there's no question that there's a very serious effort underway by a large network of organizations, some of which are religious and a great many of which are purely political, to merge the designs of the conservative wing in politics, the far conservative wing, with the fundamentalist Christian groups, and that is a serious effort. I don't know whether it's going to bear fruit or not, but it's something that a great many politicians are concerned about, and which some politicians are certainly attempting to take advantage of. It's new enough so that I think it remains to be seen whether this is going to be a lasting political force, but I think it's very seriously, it is a very serious effort. So that's why we've paid it some attention. Okay?